Story 1: The Night Watcher. In the fall of 2021, I moved to a small townhouse in southern Illinois, chasing the kind of quiet that might stitch together the pieces of a life torn apart by a brutal breakup. I was 27, raw from heartbreak and desperate for a fresh start. The townhouse was one of 12 identical units in a cul-de-sac off a lonely rural highway, each a beige box with vinyl siding, neatly trimmed hedges, and wind chimes that sang softly in the evening breeze. The neighborhood had a sterile suburban charm, mailboxes with family names in curling script, porch lights that flickered on at dusk, and a stillness that felt both comforting and oppressive. Most residents were retirees or young families who kept to themselves, their lives unfolding behind closed curtains. I didn't mind. After the chaos of my last relationship, I wanted to disappear into my new job as an inventory manager at a distribution center, where the late hours and repetitive tasks promised a numbing routine. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. But solitude, I learned, has a way of turning sinister when the night takes notice. It began with the man 3 doors down. I noticed him the first week I moved in, though at first, he was just a shadow in my peripheral vision. He was tall, broad-shouldered, probably in his mid-40s, with a scruffy beard that seemed to grow more from neglect than choice. His clothes were unremarkable: faded jeans, a worn jacket, sometimes a black hoodie pulled low over his face. Every night as I pulled into my driveway around 9 or 10 p.m., I'd see him. Sometimes he paced his small front yard, a cigarette's ember glowing faintly in the dark. Other times he stood motionless at the edge of his driveway, facing the street, his silhouette stark against the dim street lamp. He never waved, never nodded, never acknowledged me in any way, but his eyes followed me. I'd feel them as I fumbled with my keys, a cold weight pressing against my back, like a hand reaching out from the darkness. At first I brushed it off. Small towns breed eccentrics, I told myself. Maybe he was an insomniac, or just like the night air. My friend Jake, over a crackling FaceTime call, laughed it off. "Guy's probably just bored," he said, sipping a beer. "Some people get weird when they're alone too long." My mom was gentler, suggesting he might be grieving or simply enjoyed stargazing. But their explanations didn't fit. It wasn't just that he was always there, night after night, like a fixture in the dark. It was his stillness. He didn't fidget, didn't check his phone, didn't shift his weight like a normal person. He stood like a statue, his gaze fixed on some distant point, or on me. When I caught his eye, he didn't look away. He stared, unblinking, his face a blank mask that felt like a challenge, daring me to react. I tried to ignore it. I'd park, hurry inside, lock the door, and draw the curtains. But the feeling lingered, a prickling at the base of my neck, like I was being watched even through the walls. My townhouse was modest. 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a small backyard accessible through a sliding glass door in my ground floor bedroom. The backyard was nothing special, just a patch of decorative gravel surrounded by a wooden fence with a spring-loaded gate that snapped shut with a metallic clang. I kept the blinds closed at night, not because I was paranoid, at least not at first, but because the rural darkness outside felt too vast, too empty. It was the kind of dark that swallowed sound, that made you feel like the only person left in the world. The first real incident came in mid-September, about a month after I'd settled in. I'd had a grueling shift at the distribution center, the kind where the inventory sheets blurred into a headache and my back ached from lifting boxes. I got home around 10:30 p.m., microwaved a frozen burrito, and collapsed into bed, too tired to change out of my work clothes. At exactly 2:37 a.m., the red digits of my bedside clock seared into my memory. I jolted awake to a sound. It was sharp, grating, like metal scraping against wood, followed by a low, creaking groan that vibrated through the walls. My bedroom faced the backyard, the sliding glass door hidden behind vertical blinds that swayed faintly in the draft. I lay still, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might betray me. The sound came again, slower, more deliberate, like someone was dragging a blade across the wooden fence. Then I heard footsteps, not the skittering of an animal, but heavy, measured crunches on the gravel. Each one distinct, as if the person wanted me to know they were there. My mouth went dry. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling so badly I nearly knocked it off the nightstand. I crept out of bed, my bare feet cold against the hardwood, and moved to the window. I parted the blinds just enough to peek out, my breath catching. The backyard was pitch black, the gravel glinting faintly under a sliver of moonlight. The motion light above the door hadn't triggered, which meant whoever was out there was either too far from the sensor or knew how to avoid it. The thought sent a chill down my spine. I dialed 911, whispering to the dispatcher about the noises, my address tumbling out in a rush. She was calm, professional, asking me to stay put and keep the line open. I crouched by the bed, clutching a dull kitchen knife I kept in my nightstand. A pathetic defense, but it was all I had. The minutes stretched, each second punctuated by the faint crunch of gravel. I strained to hear, my ears ringing with the effort, but the sounds had stopped. The silence was worse, heavy and expectant, like the moment before a storm breaks. Red and blue lights finally flickered through my front window. I opened the door to two officers, a stocky man with a buzz cut and a younger woman with sharp eyes. I explained what I'd heard, the scraping, the creaking, the footsteps. The male officer checked the backyard while the woman stayed with me, asking questions in a clipped tone. "You live alone?" she asked. I nodded. "Anyone have a reason to mess with you? Ex-boyfriend, maybe?" I shook my head, my throat tight. My ex was bitter, but this didn't feel like him. This felt colder, more deliberate. The male officer returned, his flashlight in hand. "Gates closed," he said. "No signs of tampering, no footprints. You sure it wasn't an animal?" His tone carried a hint of skepticism, like I was some nervous city kid spooked by the countryside. "It wasn't an animal," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I know what I heard." He shrugged, scribbling in his notebook. "Probably just a raccoon," he said, giving me a look that screamed, "You're wasting our time." They filed a report and left after 10 minutes, their patrol car vanishing into the night. I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch, knife in hand, staring at the sliding glass door until dawn. The next morning I checked the yard myself. The gravel looked undisturbed, each stone glinting in the weak sunlight. But as I approached the gate, I saw it, a flat, smooth stone about the size of a paperback wedged under the bottom of the wooden fence. It wasn't there before, and it was placed too precisely to be accidental. The gate's heavy spring should have snapped it shut, but the stone held it open just a crack, enough for someone to slip through without a sound. My stomach twisted. I yanked the stone out and tossed it into the yard, watching it skid across the gravel. My hands shook as I called the police again, explaining what I'd found. The dispatcher added it to the report, but said there wasn't much they could do without evidence of a crime. "Can you check with the neighbors?" I asked, my voice rising. "Look for cameras?" She was polite but firm. No crime, no investigation. The unease grew into a constant hum in my chest. I started double-checking locks, keeping lights on, avoiding the backyard after dark. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stone could have been a coincidence, but the man 3 doors down kept creeping into my thoughts. His stillness, his unblinking stare, it felt like he was at the center of this, though I had no proof. I started noticing him more, not just at night, but during the day. Once, as I left for work, I saw him in his driveway, watching me reverse out. Another time, he was near the cul-de-sac's entrance, his head turning slowly as I drove past. Each encounter chipped away at my sense of safety, leaving me feeling exposed, like prey in a hunter's sights. 2 nights later, it escalated. I woke at 2:14 a.m. to the sound of my back door handle rattling. It was soft at first, a gentle twist, like someone testing the lock. Then it grew harder, more insistent, the metal clicking as it resisted. My heart slammed against my ribs, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I sat up, clutching my phone, the knife trembling in my other hand. The blinds were closed, but I could feel a presence beyond the glass, heavy and deliberate, like a predator sizing up its prey. The motion light flicked on, casting harsh shadows across the room. Through a tiny gap in the blinds, I saw a silhouette, tall, broad, unmistakably human, standing motionless outside. My blood ran cold. He didn't move, didn't run, just stood there, his outline stark against the light. I called 911 again, whispering to the dispatcher. "Someone's trying to get in," I said, my eyes locked on the shadow. "They're right outside my door." She told me to stay put, that officers were coming. I crouched in the hallway, out of sight, my pulse roaring. The rattling stopped, but the shadow lingered, a dark shape that seemed to absorb the light. When the police arrived, the same two officers, they found footprints in the gravel, big and deep, leading to the door and back to the gate. "Men's boots, size 11 or 12, the female officer said, her tone serious. But since no one had broken in, they said there was nothing they could do. "No crime committed," the male officer said, almost apologetically. "We'll patrol more often. Keep your doors locked." I wanted to scream. Locked doors hadn't stopped this. Footprints were proof, but they treated it like an inconvenience. I begged them to check the neighbor 3 doors down to ask if anyone had seen anything. They refused, citing privacy laws. "Unless you've got a name or evidence, we can't knock on doors," the woman said. I felt like I was losing my mind, trapped in a nightmare where no one would listen. The next day, I bought 2 Wi-Fi security cameras and installed them. One above the back door, one on the front porch. I tested the feeds, ensuring they caught every angle. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, lights off, the glow of my phone screen casting shadows as I watched the live feed. The hours dragged, the silence oppressive. At 2:23 a.m., the back camera triggered. My heart stopped. A man stepped into frame, moving with a predator's grace, his steps silent on the gravel. He was tall, broad, wearing a black hoodie with the hood up, jeans and black gloves. He approached the door, paused, and looked up, directly at the camera. His face was half shadowed, but I saw the scruffy beard, the heavy jaw. It was him. The man 3 doors down, his lips curled into a slow, deliberate grin, wide and unnatural, like a wolf baring its teeth. His eyes locked onto the lens, and it felt like he was staring through the screen, into me. Then he backed away, still smiling, and melted into the darkness. I called the police, my hands shaking as I showed them the footage. They watched in silence, the male officer's jaw tightening as the grin filled the screen. "That's unsettling," the female officer admitted. But they said the same thing. No break-in, no damage, no weapon. "We can't arrest someone for standing in your yard," she said. I begged them to check the neighbor's doorbell cam, to talk to him. They refused, their hands tied by protocol. "Keep recording," they said. "If he does something actionable, we'll move." I felt like I was screaming into a void, my fear dismissed as irrational. That night, I packed a bag and checked into a hotel. The thought of staying in that house, knowing he'd been at my door, smiling like he owned the night, was unbearable. When I returned the next day to grab more things, I found 4 muddy handprints on the glass door, too high, too low, as if someone had crouched there, pressing their hands against the glass, staring inside for who knows how long. The cameras hadn't caught it. The motion sensor hadn't triggered, as if he'd known exactly where to stand. I stood there staring at the prints, my breath fogging the glass. They were large, smudged, the mud caked into the lines of the palms like a signature. I broke my lease a week later, forfeiting my deposit. I couldn't stay another night, not with his eyes burned into my memory, not with the handprints haunting the glass. On the day I moved out, I found a note in my mailbox, written in cramped, jagged handwriting on lined paper. It read, "The cops leave, but I don't." My heart stopped. The words were a promise, a threat carved into the paper. I filed one last report, handing the note to an officer who looked genuinely disturbed. He promised a wellness check on the neighborhood, maybe a conversation with the man 3 doors down. But it was too late. I packed my car, left the keys in the landlord's drop box, and drove away, the cul-de-sac shrinking in my rear view. A month later, I got a Facebook message from a woman named Kayla, the new tenant in my old unit. Her words hit like a punch. "Hi, I think you used to live here. Have you ever seen a guy in a black hoodie in the backyard? I keep hearing footsteps at night, and last night someone knocked on the glass door at 2 a.m. and just stood there." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. I wanted to warn her, to tell her to run, but I couldn't find the words. I didn't reply. I closed the app and tried to forget, but her message lingered, a ghost in my inbox. Sometimes in my new apartment, I lie awake and see his face. That slow, stretched grin, those unblinking eyes. I hear the crunch of gravel, the rattle of the door handle, the creak of the gate, and I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed one more night. Would I have seen him at my window, his hands pressed against the glass? Would I have heard his voice calling my name? Or worse, would I have opened the door and let him in? The night doesn't forget, and neither do I. Wherever he is, 3 doors down or somewhere else, I know he's still watching, waiting for someone else to move in. Story 2. The House That Called. In the fall of 2020, I was working a job that took me to the edges of nowhere, cleaning out foreclosed homes for a property preservation company. It wasn't glamorous, boarding up windows, hauling out junk, winterizing pipes, but it paid well enough, and I liked the solitude. Most houses were just sad, filled with the echoes of lives left behind. Faded photos, abandoned toys, half-empty liquor bottles. But every so often you'd stumble into a place that felt wrong, where the air itself seemed to hold its breath, watching you. That's what I found in a crumbling house in upstate New York, a job that still haunts me when the nights grow long. The house was in a dying town, the kind where the gas station doubled as the only grocery store, and the roads were more cracks than pavement. It sat alone off a dirt road, swallowed by overgrown brush and shadowed by dense, whispering woods. The file said it had belonged to an elderly woman who died over a year ago, with no heirs to claim it. The utilities were long disconnected, the place left to rot under the weight of neglect. My job was simple: catalog anything left behind, clear it out, and secure the house for winter. I arrived on a gray Monday morning in late October, the sky heavy with the threat of rain, the air sharp with the bite of approaching cold. The house was a one-story relic, its paint peeling like dead skin, vines clawing up the sagging porch. It looked intact, no broken windows, no graffiti, but it felt heavy, like it was waiting for something. I parked my truck in the overgrown driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires. The silence was immediate, the kind that presses against your ears, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. I grabbed my clipboard, camera, and flashlight, my boots scuffing against the porch steps as I approached the front door. It was swollen in its frame, the wood warped from years of moisture. I had to shove it open, the hinges groaning like they resented the intrusion. Inside, the air was thick with dust, carrying a sour tang of mildew that clung to the back of my throat. The living room was a time capsule, lace curtains yellowed with age, faded armchairs sagging under their own weight, porcelain figurines of shepherds and angels collecting cobwebs on a mantel. It reminded me of my grandmother's house, but colder, like the warmth had been sucked out long ago. I started my routine, snapping photos of every room for the company's records. The floorboards creaked under my weight, each step stirring up clouds of dust that danced in the weak light filtering through the windows. My work phone was in my pocket, set to airplane mode since I'd checked the signal on arrival. No bars, no service, just dead air. I was alone, miles from the nearest neighbor, the kind of isolation that usually felt freeing. But here, it felt different, like the house was aware of me, its silence not empty but watchful. The first odd thing happened about 20 minutes in. I was in the kitchen, photographing a cracked linoleum counter cluttered with chipped mugs, when my phone rang. The sound was jarring, a shrill chime cutting through the quiet. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. The screen read, "Unknown caller." I stared at it, confused. There was no service out here. No way a call could come through. I hesitated, then answered, expecting a glitch or maybe my supervisor checking in from some satellite line. Nothing. Just a faint crackle, like static from an old radio, followed by a low hum that seemed to vibrate in my chest. "Hello?" I said, my voice sounding small in the empty house. No response. I said it again, louder, but the line stayed silent. I hung up, brushing it off as a network fluke, though my pulse didn't quite believe me. I pocketed the phone and kept working, moving through the house with a growing unease. The hallway smelled faintly metallic, like old pennies, and led to 3 bedrooms. The first was empty except for a sagging mattress on the floor, its fabric stained and fraying, the kind of thing you'd find in a squat house, not a home. The second was a sewing room, with a wooden desk covered in spools of thread, a rusted sewing machine, and a corkboard pinned with yellowed newspaper clippings. I leaned closer, my flashlight beam catching the faded print. They were obituaries, dozens of them, carefully cut out and pinned in neat rows. Names I didn't recognize, all local, some dating back decades. Margaret Ellis, 73, passed July 14th, 1987. Thomas Reed, 52, passed March 9th, 2001. Each one was clipped with precision, the edges clean, as if the task had been a ritual. A chill ran through me, but I told myself it was just the eccentricity of an old woman who'd lived alone too long, collecting death notices like some people collect stamps. The master bedroom was next, sparse but heavy with presence. A single bed with a quilted headboard sat against one wall, its covers neatly folded despite the dust. A nightstand held a small lamp and a rotary phone, its off-white plastic yellowed with age, the coiled cord tangled like a snake. I stared at it, struck by how out of place it felt. A rotary phone in 2020, in a house with no utilities? It was a relic, useless without a landline, and the file said the power and phone lines had been cut over a year ago. I snapped a photo, the flash glinting off the phone's dull surface, and moved on to the bathroom. The mildew smell was stronger here, the tiles cracked and grimy, a rusted faucet dripping faintly into a stained sink. That's when my phone rang again. Unknown caller flashed on the screen. My stomach twisted. I stepped into the hallway, my boots echoing on the hardwood, and pressed the phone to my ear. Silence, then a faint whisper, so soft I almost missed it. Don't answer the phone in the bedroom. The voice was low, raspy, neither male nor female, like it had been scraped from the bottom of a throat. The line went dead before I could respond. My heart slammed against my ribs, my breath coming in shallow bursts. I checked the call log, nothing. No record of the call. The house was silent, the kind of silence that feels like it's listening back. I spun around, half expecting to see someone behind me, but the hallway was empty, the shadows still. I told myself it was a prank, someone messing with me. But who? No one knew I was here except my supervisor, and he wasn't the type to play games. I checked every window, closed, locked, no signs of tampering. I was alone, miles from anyone, in a house with no cell service. My hands shook as I tried to call my supervisor, but the call failed, the screen mocking me with no signal. The whisper echoed in my head, "Don't answer the phone in the bedroom." I glanced down the hallway toward the master bedroom, the door slightly ajar, the rotary phone just visible in the dim light. It sat there, silent, innocent, but it felt like a coiled trap. I forced myself to keep working, boxing up books and figurines in the living room, but the air felt heavier now, like eyes were boring into the back of my neck. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. Every shadow seemed to shift just beyond my flashlight's reach. I kept glancing at the hallway, expecting to see a figure standing there, but it was always empty. Then it happened. The rotary phone in the bedroom rang, a shrill, mechanical trill that cut through the silence like a scream. My stomach dropped. That phone couldn't ring. The line was dead, the house abandoned. But it rang again, insistent, the receiver trembling with each pulse. I stood frozen in the living room, my clipboard slipping from my hands, the sound echoing down the hallway. It rang a third time, then a fourth, each chime louder, more demanding, like it was calling specifically for me. I walked toward the bedroom, my legs moving against my will, drawn by some primal curiosity. The phone sat there, ancient and unplugged, shrieking into the void. The warning from the call burned in my mind. Don't answer the phone in the bedroom. I stood in the doorway, my flashlight beam trembling across the room, the phone's shadow stretching long and distorted on the wall. It rang again, and I felt a pull, an urge to pick it up, to hear what was on the other side. but the whisper held me back, a cold hand on my spine. The ringing stopped, and the silence that followed was worse. Thick, suffocating, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for my next move. I backed out, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I told myself to finish the job, to check the basement and get out. The basement door was in the kitchen, a heavy slab of wood that creaked as I opened it. The stairs descended into darkness, the air growing colder and damper with each step. My flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing shelves of rusted paint cans, broken furniture, and a small table in the far corner. On it was another phone, a cordless model, gray plastic, caked in dust. Next to it was a stack of yellowed notebooks, their covers warped from moisture. I picked one up, my hands shaking, and flipped it open. Page after page listed names, dates, and cryptic notes. Lena H., July 3rd, 2019. Rang once, didn't answer. Carl M., September 12th, 2019. Picked up, warned him. Dozens of entries, some with chilling addendums. Answered, didn't listen. Answered, gone. I dropped the notebook, my breath catching. The names, the dates, they weren't random. They were a record, a ledger of something I couldn't comprehend. The basement felt alive, the shadows shifting just beyond my light's reach, the air pressing against me like a living thing. I bolted up the stairs, slamming the door behind me, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the lock. I didn't finish the job. I grabbed my things, drove back to the office, and filed a vague report about possible squatters. I refused to go back, no matter how much my supervisor pushed. 2 days later, my coworker Mark was assigned to finish the job. He texted me that morning. The phone in the bedroom with no service rang while I was in there. What the hell? My heart sank. I called him immediately, his voice shaky as he told me he hadn't answered it, too freaked out to try. He described the same heavy air, the same feeling of being watched. The next day, Mark quit without notice. I looked him up on Facebook months later. He was alive, posting about a new job in a different state, but he never responded to my messages. I don't blame him. The police were called to check for squatters, but they found nothing. No one. Just an empty house with a rotary phone that shouldn't ring and a basement full of names. I still don't know what was in that house, but I dream about it sometimes. The ringing, the whisper, the feeling of being watched. I see those notebooks, the names scrawled in jagged ink, and I wonder, if I'd answered that phone, whose name would be in there now? And what would have answered me from the other side? Story 3, The Basement Door. In the fall of 2019, I was 29, living alone in a rental house on the outskirts of a small Midwestern town in Ohio. The house was old, a single-story relic with creaky hardwood floors, walls so thin I could hear the neighbor's dog barking half a block away, and a faint musty smell that never quite went away. The rent was dirt cheap, which was the only reason I'd signed the lease, fresh off a dead-end job and a string of bad decisions that had left me craving simplicity. The place came with a basement, accessible through a heavy wooden door in the hallway by the bathroom, which I used to store old furniture, tools, and boxes I hadn't bothered to unpack. For the first few months, it was fine. Just a quirky old house with rattling pipes and a kitchen cabinet that refused to stay closed. But the basement, I hated it from the start. The door always stuck, swollen in its frame, and the light switch was halfway down the stairs, forcing you to stumble through the dark to reach it. The first time I went down there, the air felt wrong, stale, heavy, like it was pressing against my chest. I stored my stuff, locked the door, and avoided it as much as possible. That changed in late October. I was working as a night shift security guard at a warehouse on the edge of town, a job that left me wired and exhausted, my days flipped upside down. I'd get home around 3 a.m., crash by 4, and wake up in the early afternoon, my body clock a mess. One night I got home after a particularly grueling shift, my boots still damp from patrolling a rainy lot. I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth, the fluorescent light buzzing faintly overhead, when I heard it. 3 soft knocks from behind the basement door. They were faint but deliberate, like someone rapping their knuckles gently against the wood. Tap, tap. Tap. I froze, toothbrush still in my mouth, my reflection in the mirror wide-eyed and pale. My first thought was the pipes, or maybe the house settling, anything to explain it away. But the knocks came again, slower this time, each one echoing in the quiet house like a heartbeat. I stepped into the hallway, the air colder than it should have been, and stared at the basement door. It was closed, the brass knob dull in the dim light. The house was silent, the kind of silence that amplifies every creak and rustle, making your own breathing sound like an intrusion. I waited, holding my breath, but nothing else came. I whispered to myself, "It's just the house," my voice sounding hollow even to me. I went to bed, locking my bedroom door and leaving the TV on low for comfort, the flicker of late-night infomercials casting shadows on the walls. Sleep didn't come easily. My mind kept replaying those knocks, the rhythm too precise, too human to be pipes or wind. The next morning, I forced myself to check the basement. I stood in front of the door, my hand hovering over the knob, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The door groaned as I pulled it open, the hinges protesting with a low, mournful creak. The stairs descended into darkness, the air growing colder with each step. I fumbled for the light switch halfway down, my fingers brushing against the damp wall before finding it. The single bulb flickered on, casting a weak yellowish glow that left the corners in shadow. The basement was as I'd left it. Boxes stacked against one wall, a rusty toolbox, a sagging couch I'd shoved down there when I moved in. No footprints, no broken windows, nothing out of place. I checked the small, high windows near the ceiling, their glass cloudy but intact, the latches rusted shut. Everything was normal, but the air felt heavy, like it was holding a secret. I climbed back up, locked the door, and told myself it was my imagination, the stress of night shifts playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. A few nights later, it happened again. I was in the bathroom, rinsing my face, the cold water sharp against my skin, when a single sharp knock echoed from the basement door. It was loud, like someone had slammed their fist against the wood, the sound reverberating through the house. I yanked open the bathroom door, my heart racing, water dripping from my chin. The hallway was empty, the basement door closed, its knob glinting faintly in the light. I pressed my ear against the wood, my breath shallow, expecting to hear nothing. Instead, I caught the faint sound of breathing, slow, steady, like someone was standing just on the other side, listening as intently as I was. My skin prickled, my hand tightening on the doorknob. I wanted to open it, to prove it was nothing, but my body wouldn't move. The breathing continued, a low rhythmic sound, almost in sync with my own. I stumbled back, locked myself in my bedroom, and called my landlord, my voice shaking as I told him about the knocks and the breathing. He was skeptical, his voice gruff over the phone. "Old houses make noises," he said. "Pipes, drafts, you name it. I'll check it out tomorrow." I didn't sleep that night, sitting up in bed with a baseball bat I dug out of a closet, my eyes fixed on the bedroom door. The landlord showed up the next morning, a heavy-set man in his 60s with a toolbox and a tired expression. We went down to the basement together, his flashlight sweeping across the concrete floor. He checked the windows, the walls, even tapped the pipes with a wrench. Nothing was disturbed, no signs of entry. I didn't tell him about the breathing. I didn't want to sound unhinged. He left after half an hour, muttering about overactive imaginations and promising to send a plumber if it happened again. I felt dismissed, my fear reduced to a tenant's complaint. For a week, things were quiet. I started to relax, convincing myself it was just the house, just my mind playing tricks. I bought heavier curtains, kept the TV on louder, tried to drown out the silence. Then one night, I was on the couch watching a late-night talk show, the volume low, when I heard the basement door creak open. Not a knock, but a slow, grinding squeal of hinges moving, deliberate and unmistakable. I muted the TV, my skin prickling, and sat up, my eyes locked on the hallway. The door was wide open, a black rectangle leading to nothing, the darkness beyond swallowing the light. I hadn't touched that door in weeks. My heart pounded as I grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the hallway, my bare feet silent on the hardwood. The air felt colder as I approached, like a draft was seeping up from below, carrying that same stale, heavy smell. I shined the flashlight down the stairs. The bulb was off, the basement a void of shadows. I reached for the light switch. Nothing. The light was dead, the switch clicking uselessly under my thumb. Then I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, climbing the stairs. They weren't hurried, just steady, each creak of the wood louder than the last, each step closer. My pulse roared in my ears, my flashlight beam trembling as it swept the stairs. I couldn't see anything, but the footsteps kept coming, heavy and measured, like whoever was down there knew I was listening. I slammed the door shut, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the knob. For a moment, I felt resistance, like something was pushing back from the other side, the wood vibrating under my palms. Then it stopped, the footsteps falling silent. I called the police, my voice barely steady, as I told them someone was in my basement. 2 officers arrived, their flashlights cutting through the dark as they searched the house. They went down to the basement, their boots echoing on the stairs, and came back up shaking their heads. "Nothing down there," the older officer said, a wiry man with graying hair. "No signs of entry, no one hiding. You sure you heard something?" His tone wasn't unkind, but it carried that familiar skepticism, like I was jumping at shadows. The younger officer, a woman with sharp eyes, checked the windows and the back door. "Everything's secure," she said. "Maybe it was the wind." I didn't argue, but I knew what I'd heard. They left after filing a report, suggesting I get a better lock for the basement door. I stood in the front yard after they left, staring at the house, unwilling to go back inside until the sun came up. The next morning, I bought a padlock and bolted it onto the basement door. I didn't care if it violated the lease. I wasn't taking chances. For a month, things were quiet. No knocks, no creaks, no breathing. I started to think it was over, that whatever had been in the basement was gone. I kept the padlock on, checked it daily, and avoided the hallway at night. Then one night in late November, I came home from work and froze in the hallway. The basement door was open, the padlock lying broken on the floor, its metal twisted like it had been pried apart with impossible strength. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness peeking through, the air thick with that stale, heavy smell. My heart sank. Every incident, the knocks, the breathing, the footsteps, had happened at night when I was alone. I didn't go down. I couldn't. My legs felt like lead, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I stared at the open door. I grabbed a bag, threw in some clothes, and stayed at a friend's place, crashing on their couch with my baseball bat within reach. When I returned the next day, I nailed the door shut, hammering nails into the frame until my arms ached, then wedged a chair against it for good measure. I told myself it was enough, that nothing could get through. But a few nights later, at 3 a.m., I was in bed when I heard it, a low guttural sound, like the rumble of vocal cords coming from beneath the floorboards. It wasn't words, just a presence, vibrating through the wood directly under me, like something was pressing up from below, trying to reach me. My skin crawled, my hands clutching the bat as I stared at the floor, half expecting it to splinter open. I called the police again. They searched the basement, their flashlights sweeping the corners, but found nothing. No one. No signs of tampering, not even a speck of dust disturbed. The older officer tried to lighten the mood, asking if I'd been watching too many horror movies. I didn't laugh. After they left, I stood in the hallway, staring at the nail-shut door, the chair still wedged against it. That was it. I packed my things, leaving everything in the basement behind, and moved out, breaking my lease without a second thought. The landlord was furious, threatening to sue for damages, but I didn't care. I couldn't stay in that house, not with that sound echoing in my mind, not with the feeling that something was still down there, waiting. I don't know what was in that basement, and I don't want to know, but sometimes, in my new apartment, I lie awake and hear that low, wordless rumble in my memory. I see the door, slightly ajar, the darkness beyond it alive with possibility. And I wonder, if I'd gone down those stairs, what would have been waiting for me in the dark? Would it have had a face, a voice, or would it have been something else entirely, something that didn't belong in the light.